everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm very excited to see all these presentations and the information provided by Joanne, Francis, and Andrea. It's a great to know that we are talking about this and involving the right partners and starting to think that what powers we have and how to channelize this through a right platform. So we have a couple of questions. I think this is a right segue. One of the question, perhaps any of our experts may wanted to address this, how to separate price and value when needing to follow procurement bylaws. So I know we heard about this in the presentation that lowest price is not always the criteria to make the decision, but yet there are procurement bylaws and policies which perhaps restrict how do we channelize our procurement method. So if you wanted to take this question and provide some insight, that would be appreciated.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, it's okay. You probably got a better, more direct insight than I do, Andrea. But I think the question is a valid one, and I think it's going back to the slide that I talked about in terms of structure and process. It seems that budgeting cycles are short term, and cost over the life or savings over the life of a product, are more longer term. And so, how do you intersect the two? And I think that goes back to, again, you're not going to be affecting budgeting cycles anytime soon. They are what they are. But I think that's where you have to link into the other objectives of the organization in terms of and create a full cost accounting. So looking at what is the total cost of ownership over the lifetime which we will own it as a municipality, and that's going to derive for you, obviously dollar value amounts, but it's also going to build in some of these other byproducts that may have a human cost, an environmental cost, or even a financial cost. So I think we have to start tackling expanding our the criteria under which we are actually deriving value or financially assigning value to a product versus that just 12-month budgeting cycle. That's the first thing. The second thing, and it's connected, and I'd love to talk to the person that's asking the question about bylaws. I think that if there's a procurement bylaw that precludes or restricts you from redefining value and thinking about the other social and environmental objectives of the organization, then it may be time to actually review and renew the bylaw itself. We just got to sort of state that out loud, that maybe it's the bylaw that's the barrier, and that we need to address that. I'm sure Andrea and Francis have other things to add.
Andrea?
Yeah, excellent points, of course, as always, Joanne. You do need to not consider the bylaw as a static document. We have a tendency to think that it is set in stone, but it's actually not. The way that we pursue sustainable procurement is that we don't have it integrated into the bylaw. It's actually a separate policy. So that allows us to update the policy on a more regular cycle than the bylaw. And you have to start having the conversation internally, because it really is changing the way that people think. You're challenging years old attitudes of, if I get the cheapest price, that's the best for my organization, and that's what I have to decide to do. But breaking out of that, looking at what other people are doing and being an advocate and saying other municipalities are doing this. It is possible. It's a proven thing. I find that often helps in the conversation, because we're not talking about something like Francis said, it's not really new. We're returning to what our grandparents were doing, but it may feel new to people, and making sure that you don't consider your bylaw a static document. If you have a definition of best value, go and read it. See what it actually says, because it may not be as restrictive as you think. And if you're working under the broader public sector procurement directives, there's nothing in there that directly precludes redefining value. So knowing those documents, knowing where you have wiggle room and building wiggle room in actively as you go forward, I think is probably the most effective. But know that it will take you some time, and you will have to be a strong advocate.
Thank you, Andrea. Francis?
Well, I'm just going to add, we're currently running this pilot using TCO with 8 broader public sector organizations right now. And it's been quite an eye-opener for me in terms of the breadth of tools that are out there. It is confusing. But I think the biggest learning I've had out of this is that TCO in itself is not enough, that we need a bid evaluation tool that aligns the costs with the organization's stated purpose and goals. And I think that's costs are one thing, but this alignment with what are we trying to achieve here? And it's a livable planet, a safe city to live in, where kids have opportunity, blah, 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 right? So it's alignment is one of the key things, I think.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. And if I were to add one last piece here on the price and the value, of course, procurement bylaws does define different type of methods in procurement. Obviously, having the discussion at the get-go, having an annual procurement plan, having the discussions with the department to see, even if it's a lowest price, some items you may want it to have a decision making that, okay, lowest price is the criteria for decision making, but it does not preclude the having the discussion to see what is the total life cycle costing of this product. Are we segregating the spend over, like, are we making the small purchases or doing the total life of this product, whatever we are buying? So these kind of discussions still can happen even if the procurement bylaw restricts you to have the lowest price decisions on certain criterias. As Joanne said, if the procurement bylaw was written 10 years ago, it's certainly not going to serve and keep up with the current demand of the market. So maybe a time to revisit the policies and processes. I just have one more follow-up question here. Perhaps Andrea can start. Our audience want to know, does Mississauga use a life cycle costing software for each bid? How they decide on these kind of procurements? Is there a software being used at City of Mississauga?
So we're not currently using a software for total cost of ownership. So when we did some exploration, it is, and Francis knows this and can talk probably extensively about it is a very complex metric to try to achieve. And it really depends on the commodity you're purchasing. So we've focused primarily on fleet purchases because it's very easy to do that TCO. There's lots of examples of how to do it. So that's usually where we've been focusing it. When you start to apply total cost of ownership to other things, it's a little bit more complicated and you have to build more time into the process, and it becomes a bit more of a strategic procurement where you're really trying to bring everybody in and have these conversations, and even start with people who are open enough to ask that question of, can I look at total cost of ownership? That's something we're trying to encourage people to do more, is take that ownership and say, hey, I've got this procurement, I'd like to look at that. But currently we don't have a software in place. It's a manual calculation, and it's always disclosed in the bid documents that it is the method of award so that the suppliers understand what they're bidding on.
This is actually also a place where collaborating with the asset management team would make a lot of sense, because a lot of asset managers have the decision support software to do this kind of life cycle costing for different asset classes. And even if you're a small municipality and you use Excel, the very discipline of trying to think through a life cycle of an asset, from acquisition to operations and maintenance to the interventions that you need to maximize the life cycle of the asset, if you're having that with different practitioners around the table, it changes the conversation. And obviously those inputs will shape the actual analysis. So that's just another point on that.
Yeah, thank you. As you can see, the people are getting excited and all these questions are driving, the brain juices are going. So I'm very interested to know, we heard about this, what is the role of the procurement, what's the role of the asset managers. So what concrete steps we as the procurement specialist and the asset managers can take to work together constructively on these sustainable issues? So maybe start with Joanne.
Pick on me first, Umesh. Okay, that's great. Thanks for the question. I think part of what we're learning about these functions who really have their thumb on the pulse at the municipal level is first to identify the barriers so that we know what common and typical practice is and what's needed in terms of adjusting that. So, and that's actually, for me, it's a very useful starting place to know, where municipalities tend to have resistance, which speaks to how do we give them resources and tools and advocate for change. And so, for me, that's a great starting point to know what the barriers are.
Thank you. Francis, do you want to add something to this?
I think, and Andrea alluded to this a little, it's just getting started. Putting a foot forward, trying it on something small. I have a quote here that your best RFX from a sustainability standpoint is your next one. So it's a continuous improvement process. And, people are often, they let the perfect be the enemy of the good, right? So sometimes we just gotta try. We just gotta get out and do it. And you'll find unusual allies. That the nice thing about sustainability is that everybody is 90% of people are quite passionate about this. So if you ask them to work with you, they'll actually come with you, and they will actually put a lot of effort into it. And it doesn't. I'm seeing this across the board on all areas of business, that you don't have to convince people why as much anymore. It's just the how. And let's get on it. Let's do it. So that's the good news. It's a lot easier than it used to be.
Thank you. Joanne, you touched upon this point really well, and perhaps I wanted to hear from Andrea. What are some of the practical internal and external barriers procurement and asset managers must overcome? So if you wanted to share some thoughts there.
I can speak to City of Mississauga because I hear things from my colleagues, but I don't want to speak on their behalf. We're very, very lucky at the city to have an executive champion like Mayor Bonnie Crombie. The reason we have sustainable procurement is because our mayor ran on it. It is important to her, and she enacted this policy. So to have that champion is so important, because when you don't, the change that you make feels a lot more gradual. It's harder to put policy in place. It's harder to, have those conversations where you say, okay, we are assuming a little bit of risk here. How do we mitigate it? Because people just kind of see it as, well, we may have declared that there's a climate emergency, but how does that impact my practical day-to-day life? So, we may have these policies, and I think it is very important that we have strategic priorities that align with addressing climate change, but I'm not sure it's what drives everybody. And climate change often feels really scary, and we feel like we can't do a lot about it. And I think all of us get stuck in this thinking of, I can't do anything. This is a systemic problem. It's bigger than me. But removing the barrier of that understanding of, you can actually make huge change. You have power to do that. Like if you're doing construction, if you're doing asset management, whatever you're buying, if you're buying capital asset, you have huge power to do that. And, the information's out there. We are also very pressed for time. We know this. A lot of us are understaffed and we don't have enough budget. And if you're doing it side of desk, it can feel very complicated. We're very lucky at the city to have a dedicated full-time role as a resource. Our buyers don't do this side of desk. I help them with this. So not having a dedicated resource can be quite a challenge. It often falls, I think Umesh can speak to this, to the manager to kind of be the leader, and they often have many other priorities. So not having enough time, not having an executive champion, and not understanding that we can do something are all major barriers.
Yeah, thank you. You touched upon great points here. I wanted to hear from Francis, being the external side of it, being the vendor. What do you see when you see these opportunities for business, and the municipalities are going out with their requests for proposals and so on and so forth? What are some of the external barriers you see as the main contributor? Because you said that you're ready to roll the dice there, you want to respond, but someone has to ask. So I wanted to know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. One is there's a perception that there's actually not only policy or bylaw requirements, but there are potentially trade trade laws that prohibit some of this stuff from being done. The understanding that I have right now is that they're mostly perceived barriers as opposed to actual, but we know procurement tends to be a quite risk-averse organization. So I would just keep going back to this, try it, just try it. Talk to vendors. I think a lot of buyers are surprised that vendors can offer this. But one of the things I often see is that a question that gets asked, I think I understand what the questioner was asking, but the answers they're going to get back aren't going to answer that question. And so you have to, it's smart. You have to ask a smart question to get a good answer back. And understanding a little around what greenwashing is, making false or misleading claims, and trying to stamp that out before, ask a really good question so that you can get the exact really good answer that you want. So a little bit of education there. And again, pointing back to Joanne's sessions coming up in the fall to really help you with some of that stuff.
Yeah, that's good. Speaking about this smart question, our audience is very smart in asking these questions. I just got another question, which is leaning towards our presentation. I'm just going to read verbatim. It's been stated that RFP documents aren't taking questions regarding sustainability. We talked about it that, RFP is lacking that information. To help the organization get started, understanding each type of acquisition is different. Is there a list that can be obtained as a sample questions, or perhaps the circular innovation might want it to work with some of the organization, whether it's Supply Chain Ontario or other organization, to come up with a document and a guiding principles, which perhaps municipalities can use as a starting point.
That's a Joanne question.
I'm happy to react to that. Thank you very much. And you've just affirmed for me that we're actually heading down the right road in the right time as an organization. So circularprocurement.ca is a brand new center of excellence that we've opened. It's been open for about 6 months. So I'll make sure that the link is if it's not in the PowerPoint presentation, that it's, I'll type it into the chat here. That this website is aimed at doing two things. It is to do exactly what's been asked for here, which is to create and offer open source, cut and pastable, plug and play tools. And they're actually provided and housed in the top spend categories of municipal governments. So whether it's construction, infrastructure, ICT, there's even a plastics category, whether it's textiles or food or catering. So we looked at the top spend categories, ordered them by priority, and have housed the cut and paste criteria principles into those. When you go on the website, you can have a look. You'll see that they're housed in those spend categories. Coupled with that is a whole slew of case studies, business cases that have empirical measurements, both social, environmental, and financial, that we've pulled from our European pals. So all of that good startup information is there. What we aim to do at the Center of Excellence is to continue to build Canadian examples, to Canadianize themselves, because some of the best examples or some of the most meaty examples we see from the Europeans who are a little bit ahead of us. The other thing I want to say is the sort of big purpose of having the Center of Excellence is to pull in collaboration. So we haven't heard a municipality yet, actually not just municipalities, any government, who have said, oh, we know everything, we have everything, we're good, we don't need to collaborate. They all want to collaborate and share their pain points and actually share best practices and resources. And in fact, the ICT pact that I spoke of, these countries, these federal governments are actually sharing criteria, which they again intend to cut and paste and use in their RFIs and RFPs. The Center of Excellence also is a place for vendors and suppliers to come to share their circular, how they're evolving into circular products, how they're evolving circular services, so that we can have a place where buyer and supplier go to learn about one another. So I encourage you to go there, and I will put it in the chat site already. Oh, somebody's got it. Thank you, Anna. And we're more than happy as an organization to work with any of you directly if you want to have a spin through the website and then to work with us to implement in your own municipality. Happy to partner with you.
Yeah, Thank you. Thank you for the great insight. And the website is also given in the chat box there. A follow-up question, perhaps, Joanne, you didn't get an easy one here because I wanted to hear from you because you answered the first question. They're saying currently environmental performance or disposal criteria is added on a project by project basis and really central through a one or two staff with the knowledge to include technical requirements in the RFPs. What are the strategies to include the total cost of ownership element into all projects and not dependent on technical knowledge of one staff? Is there a guidance or best practices that municipalities can follow? I know you answered some of this, the one part of this in your first response. Perhaps if you wanted to give another shot at this question.
Sure, happy to. Thank you. It's a loaded one. And I think if I'm reading between the lines of the question, it's really about, the environmental protocol is really about, what's the waste impact of this purchase and what's the cost and implications of end of life management. And so I'll go over to Public Works, which typically has the recycling people, and I'll ask them the question in terms of how do I structure their criteria. So if I've got that wrong, let me know. But with that context in mind, there's nothing wrong. And in fact, end of life management absolutely should be a call out in the RFP criteria. It's critical. But now it's about going up the supply chain, looking at product design. Once you look at product design, you start asking questions about what is it made of? Does it have recycled content is a great example. Where is it made? How is it made? And who is the company that made it? So it's about moving up that supply chain and asking those very critical questions that start to expand the scope and the reach of where your environmental criteria affect. So end of life management is a starting point and then move upwards. So yes, there are criteria. Yes, we can share them. They're on the website. But if you want me to sort of drill down offline, specifically with you and your situation, happy to do that. Just get in touch with my contact information.
Part of the response to that is also, it depends on every municipality will have their senior leadership team. Sorry, not just municipality. There's school boards and other kinds of public sector organizations here, but will have their senior leadership teams that will meet on cross-cutting issues, including things like asset management and procurement. So this is the kind of thing that could be raised there as well as the flag as a potential vulnerability to address. So that's just a very practical thing.
Thank you, Chris. I know we talked about this life cycle costing, total life cycle costing, and it has come up a couple of times in the presentation as well as the question. So people are wondering what are the different steps organization can take. I wanted to see an external view on this. Francis, perhaps you can share your thoughts. What steps your organization take to consider the total life cycle costing while conducting procurements?
So we do it ourselves, of course, but thinking about tools and resources, and I believe these are on Joanne's site, Bob Willard, Sustainability Advantage, has a whole bunch of free tools and resources that he gives away. So you can go and pull those down. The thing we're learning in the pilot is that you may end up having to use different TCO tools for different types of procurement. I think it depends very much on where the weighting, whether social or environmental criteria will be with different types of purchasing. So I don't think we're going to end up with one tool that fits all. But I would caution that, it's not just enough to have a total cost of ownership. You actually have to have this bid evaluation piece to do the alignment with your own organizational goals.
Thank you, Francis. I have a very interesting question from the audience. I wanted to take that. It says, how do we get this important topic in front of the municipalities? Is there a provincial or AMO role? Procurement in municipalities is typically undervalued and under-resourced. How do we get a leg up to help the whole initiative there? So perhaps I wanted to ask Chris if you wanted to take this question.
Absolutely. I think it's a really excellent question, and part of it is, if we stand back, we're all trying to figure out how to do business a little bit differently, and I think it was Joanne and Francis that kind of highlighted how the changing circumstances is really driving that. And so I think that it's something that you're seeing groups like Association of Municipalities of Ontario or the province. It's on their radar. And but I think a group that's actually doing some excellent work is the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and they have several initiatives that really connect and promote sustainability. And I think there are organizations such as ours, such as Circular Innovation Council, that are trying to work across, such as Ontario Public Buyers Association, that are trying to work across functions to really figure some of this stuff out and develop some of the tools and templates and resources that can help scale these practices.
Thank you, Chris. I know we are running out of time. I wanted to take this one last question, and this is my favorite one. Many organizations think sustainability is a compliance matter. We heard that in the chat box that there is a procurement bylaw or there is a trade agreement, so we got to do this just because somebody is saying that. What do we think that? Is this the case? That is it only related to compliance basis, or it is more than that, like rather than having, constructive and proactive approach to address the different aspect of it, whether it's social, economical, environmental issues? I wanted to hear from all of you, starting from Andrea. What are your thoughts on this question?
I think we've put ourselves in a box that doesn't necessarily exist. And I think we need to look at that and say, what do the trade agreements actually say? What does the case law say? What does our procurement bylaw say? What do our policies say? And how can we change them? Because all of us together, if we're all working on this, if you ever want to know, City of Mississauga went to market for this, can I have a copy of your procurement document? Of course you can. It's on bids and tenders. I'm happy to give it to you. We're not leaning enough on each other to make change and to show that it's possible to do those pilots and to build up that opportunity to show, look, I saved $1.7 million by doing total cost of ownership. I'm, thinking for the future actually gives us money back is kind of a new idea for us. So we need to keep chasing it and we can't give up on it. And, we like to say, the trade agreements preclude us preferencing things like local. That's something I hear all of the time, but there are thresholds for that. The trade agreements have thresholds. So for low value purchases, look at what your bylaw says. For us, it's a P card purchase with $10,000 or less. Our people can make that decision. They can decide to buy local. They can support a Mississauga business. There is that opportunity. We just need to broaden our perspective, that risk management. There is a risk when we don't behave sustainably. It's a change in thinking. To not do it is riskier than to do it. So we need to actually pursue this and get everybody on board.
Thank you. Joanne and Francis, can you bring us home quick 5 seconds?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to what you value. And I think that we're people first, even though you've got a procurement or an asset management function at work, you are a person first. And so I don't think that it would take us long to admit that this is not about compliance. This is not about the least harm or doing it. This is about getting the best value and the kind of contribution that I want to make in my everyday life to the betterment of society, and sort of get philosophical on you. But at the end of the day, what you purchase and how you purchase it and how you use it is demonstrative of your values. And we have to start living that.
Francis, last thought.
Procurement is strategic, and we have big, hairy, audacious problems that we need to tackle. Let's use the money we're already spending to tackle those and lean in collectively for the partnerships that we can deliver on, fixing our climate crisis and our species extinction issues. So let's use strategic, sustainable procurement and circular.
Well, thank you, everybody. This wraps up our panel discussion. I would love to continue this discussion at a different platform. So look for those opportunities. Over to you back, Chris.